Hello, everybody, to the next edition of the Anthony Peake Consciousness Hour. This actually technically is the April 2019 edition. Really looking forward to the show today. Somebody that has really wonderfully appreciated my work now for probably 8 or 9 years, if not longer, is the incredible Brent Raynes, who runs the Alternate Perceptions magazine out in the United States. I think Brent has interviewed me 2 or 3 times, and I've also read a lot of his material over the years as well. I've always really wanted to interview him about his work, because particularly at the moment, because I'm sort of halfway through my next book, The Invisible Universe, which I'm discussing alien entities. And Brent is one of the guys that really has been researching this area for so long. And this is why I'm very keen to talk to him about it. So just to let you a little bit of background information on Brent, which I've nicked off the web, so I hope he doesn't mind in terms of that. I'm sure it's accurate. If it isn't, he'll stand up and tell me. So Brent Raynes has been investigating and researching UFOs since 1967. It's about the time I first started getting interested in UFOs, about that time as well. It must have been a really interesting year there. I remember Brad Steiger's book, Flying Horses. What are flying horses? Flying Swords, the Hostage. And it stuck in my mind. It terrified the hell out of me, that book. It really, really did scare me. He's the author of Visitors from Hidden Realms and the editor of Alternate Perceptions magazine. Brent has traveled extensively across the US and into Canada, interviewing numerous witnesses and researchers. He has taken a comprehensive global and historical perspective on the ufological landscape. He's also participated in Native American rituals and ceremonies, gaining valuable insights and information from his interactions with these wisdom keepers. Brent is able to make revealing comparisons between the interrelated experience and disciplines of parapsychology, shamanism, Jungian archetypes, and ufology. So, without further ado, Brent, welcome to the Anthony Peake.
Well, thank you very much, Anthony. It's a great honor. I really appreciate you inviting me. And I think I've probably done about 4 interviews with you, but I remember the very first one, I think, was late 2007. How quickly the time goes by. But I remember that we were talking about all the intriguing things you're talking about. You're exploring the daemon, the how the brain operates, and how the various psychic components, the parapsychology, the quantum physics, and I love to juggle with all sorts of these different things, try to connect the dots. And you've been doing a wonderful, awesome job of it. And I like to kind of keep tabs on what your thought patterns are. Now you're writing this new book that's going to be really right up my alley, so to speak. And I'm writing a book on John Keel. And in our first interview, John Keel came up because, I mentioned about his experience with a subject on Long Island that he had hypnotized. And this experiencer described some things to him about, while under hypnosis, that actually came true, Keel wrote in Mothman Prophecies. And you proceeded to get rather excited by that, as I recall. You said, that's the daemon, that's what I've been talking about. That's the activity of the non-dominant hemisphere of the brain, this presence that exists within all of us that most of the time we're don't understand or realize is there until perhaps hypnosis or some meditative state or some way that we tap it. And, it may be a traumatic experience in one of these UFO paranormal phenomena. So anyway, I am working on a book on John Keel now, with Rosemary Guiley is the publisher, Visionary Publishing out of Connecticut. And I'm going back through some of the material, trying to straighten out some things, reorganize some. And so anyway, I know that you told me in that first interview that you were actually kind of a big Keel fan, I think, back in when his Operation Trojan Horse came out about 1970. And you says you and some of your hippie friends in Liverpool were quite intrigued. And it's interesting how so many of us have gotten into this field. I mean, I've interacted with people in Sweden and Germany and Australia and Brazil and all places all over the world, and other people in England as well who were, first got their exposure, some of their initial exposure to the unexplained and concepts that, were kind of out there at the time that Keel was introducing to us, some of us kicking and screaming along the way.
So how did you get involved in this way back from 1967? What is your background, and how did this world open up to you, in effect?
Well, initially I had read Frank Edwards' Flying Saucer Serious Business, which was a very nuts and bolts ET, tunnel vision right there. And so I thought it's either or, like the Air Force said, it's all explained as hoaxes, temperature inversion, Venus on the horizon, or, weather balloons, or, it's ET. And then I began to read really the three musketeers there, John Keel, Jacques Vallée, and Brad Steiger. And I began to realize, oh, well, there are alternative explanations. And so I've been on that alternative approach. I began corresponding with Keel back in October of '69. And I never met him in person, but I've talked with him on the phone. We had some pretty good correspondence going. And so I wish that, I never really envisioned that I would actually work on a book that would tell about, his life and about mine and other people's influence and how we were influenced by his ideas and the kind of studies that have arisen since then. But I wish that I had taken a lot more time, and, hindsight is always better than foresight. My Damon has kind of slept on the job, some, I'm afraid.
But wow, I mean, the work you've done and the research you've done is incredible. So we're touching upon our mutual admiration of John Keel and Jacques Vallée and the late Brad Steiger as well. I was really sad to discover that Brad had passed over a few months ago, because Brad and I had exchanged quite a few emails in the past, and he was going to be a future guest on this show. And sadly, things didn't work out, because I was particularly interested in Brad's involvement with the work of Philip K. Dick as well. I didn't realize that they actually met, and that Brad was working with Philip K. Dick on Philip K. Dick believing himself to be a starseed. Very stuff.
Well, as I remember, they hadn't actually met. They were planning to meet, but they had talked on the phone and writing, and they had a lot of. I mean, Philip K. Dick really resonated with the work that Brad was doing, and Brad had a lot of very unusual paranormal experiences himself. And so, I mean, and he had contributed to Alternate Perception several articles, on some of his experiences and his connection with Philip K. Dick. And I got to confess, I haven't read your book yet on Philip K. Dick, but I know I know a lot of the different angles and aspects. It's quite a fascinating thing. And Tim Beckley, I know he wrote a book with various contributions from others on his experiences. And it's
I read that. I've read that. In fact, 40 Times sent me a copy of that to go through, and as I recall, you contributed a chapter to it as well, I think, didn't you? Is that right?
Yeah, now that you jog my memory, yes, I did. It wasn't really about Philip K. Dick, but it was about other people who had similar kind of experiences. That's correct, yes. And anyway, the evidence really is overwhelming that there is a lot of, when it comes to the UFO subject, is far more complex and, perplexing and controversial. I mean, Keel dealt with this stuff back in the 60s when it really was not very popular. I mean, we had NICAP, the National Investigations Committee on Aerial Phenomena in Washington, D.C., a civilian group since about 1956, which was founded by a Marine, Major Donald Lee Kehoe, retired, and he had written about UFOs, and to him it was strictly nuts and bolts, and the contactee stuff was utter baloney. He was busy attacking George Adamski, and he didn't want any reports that dealt with aliens. And so any of that stuff, as well as the Air Force that came into him, was rejected for a long time. And Hynek, Dr. J. Allen Hynek, who was in on with, astronomical consultant for Project Blue Book for years. I think probably going, well, I know he was back in 1953, he attended the Robertson Panel report there the CIA had in DC. So he had an extensive background until they closed the doors in '69. After the Condon Committee, the University of Colorado, reviewing the literature, I think they produced about a 2,000-page report called the Condon Report afterwards. And after their 2-year study, they said that there was no justification for the Air Force to continue. There was no threat to national security, and they pretty much said the evidence was weak. But Hynek was still interested. He thought that they really had missed it, that there was, because he started his own group, the Center for UFO Studies. And I met Dr. Hynek at his home. I visited him briefly back in September of '72. And I was surprised to hear him say at the time that he found John Keel's work quite interesting. And I've, since I realized that he did discuss with Valley, they're on the edge of reality that published in 1975, they sat down and they talked about the paranormal and a lot of other controversial aspects, and they were interested, and it was Valley who actually kind of brought Hynek up to speed, because over in France he had studied landings and occupant reports, and Hynek was involved with the Air Force perspective, and he didn't take any of that stuff seriously. He said they were kind of like hearing ghost stories to him. But after Valley introduced him to the ideas, the evidence that existed that, was quite credible, he realized, okay, those burned circles on the ground could have been more than just teenagers, doing something, or just hoaxes or psychological disturbances. A lot of the organizations, NICAP and the Air Force, if they got such reports, they just, put it in the back of a file, or else dismissed it, maybe threw it away as being, they just decided it was not important, that this had to be lunatic fringe or had to be someone with a psychological disturbed personality. And so we're just kind of, I think after Bud Hopkins and Strieber kind of came along, and in '87 with their books, Communion and Intruders, and all these people started coming out of the woodwork. And a lot of people in ufology had to go from strictly the physical descriptions of craft and had to begin to take more seriously the reports of the occupants or the pilots, the entities, whatever you want to call them. And Keel had already treaded on that ground and was criticized, for mentioning missing time and mentioning abduction phenomena and things back in the '60s. And so I remember an interview with Tim Beckley. He said, "Don't you feel vindicated now, like on the paranormal, that people, I think a lot of them through England's Flying Saucer Review, other readers were going out and finding some of the same patterns with the paranormal and such that Keel had been reporting in his articles and books." And I remember he made the statement that, no, that it's, he said, "We've just kind of opened Pandora's box right now. There's still so much to uncover yet, That's kind of a, there's, we're just at the very beginning." And of course, Keel's no longer with us, but I think a lot more people are starting to look back on that. It was incredible that he was a guest on Art Bell after the movie came out, Mothman Prophecies, and Art Bell, I understand, didn't even know about John Keel. I mean, that quickly he'd been forgotten. This was a guy who'd been interviewing all kinds of people with wild stories of UFO phenomena and such, and didn't even know about Keel. I remember a researcher a few years ago I was interviewing who was dealing with abduction phenomena and had been a member of NICAP, and I mentioned John Keel, and they said, "Who's that?" And it's like, wow, I mean, this is your field. You've actually written some books and you didn't know who John Keel was. I didn't say that, but it just kind of took me by surprise. So I had to offer an explanation and continue the dialogue from there.
Is this because as I'm researching the subject at the moment, it very much seems that the ETA hypothesis, the idea that there are actually aliens coming here in physical craft, is very much the American viewpoint and the USA and Canadian viewpoint on the subject, and the more esoteric parapsychological viewpoint that John Keel and Jacques Vallée and myself and yourself takes was very much a kind of a European thing. But it seems now there's a movement across, because I'm absolutely stunned by hearing that somebody had not heard of John Keel. To me, he was the man. That he was just absolutely incredible for that. In terms of this, then, I know that you've been involved in this for an awful long time. I'm really keen to see any of the cases you've been involved in, or the cases you have experienced or interviewed people or anything that really convinced you, to make you think, there's something more going on here than just simply little green men in machines coming from I don't know, the Pleiades or whatever. Would you like to tell us a little bit about that?
Well, I started my own kind of different surveys I've done of people through the years, of trying to just a sort of a very generalized thing, but covering many paranormal components. And again, I found that indeed Keel was right. A lot of these experiencers were describing seeing ghosts. And Keel once wrote back in 1970 his book Strange Creatures from Time and Space, which really was a lot of material that was going to go into Operation Trojan Horse, but there wasn't, the publisher felt that it would be too crowded and broke a lot of that stuff out. And so he put it into another book. But Keel wrote at the time, are ghosts really UFOs and UFO entities, or are UFOs really ghosts? And he says, take your choice. And to Keel, a lot of these things were just the way we perceived them. They were dealing with some sort of interactive intelligence. Now, Keel thought a lot of it was pretty deceptive, and misleading. And it's certainly complex and confusing. But anyway, after I had talked with a number of people, a lot of people from different backgrounds, regular housewife, regular just, the guy that works in a repair shop. But then you have people who know all the sciences, who are PhDs in neuroscience and different things, physics and astronomy, and they have these incredible stories, of encounters, and a lot of times they keep a very low profile, because especially when they're not retired and they're still currently actively employed, because it doesn't matter whether they have a PhD or not. You start talking about seeing aliens and having encounter experiences, paranormal or UFO. It's something that can hurt you. You can just ask Dr. Alio Sprinkle, who used to work at the University of Colorado. He found that in all his studies of hundreds of experiencers and doing regressive hypnosis and learning the details of their alien encounters, that they hesitated to advance him in different areas, at the college, because of his interest. And they actually asked him to kind of tone it down some, because he was being quoted so much in the media, and they were kind of worried about their academic reputations. So it's, and I'm sure many others who have spoken out, like John Mack, with Harvard and so on, have experienced the same things. But anyway, that was, I got into it at age 14 back in early 67. I initially got interested back in March of 66, when there were all the sightings in Michigan, and, Hynek uttered the word swamp gas, which caused a lot of hoopla. I remember my dad and I looking out, because there were reports of UFOs in Maine. It was a widespread thing. I lived in the state of Maine. I was born and raised there. And of course, today I live in Tennessee. That's where my wife has always lived. So anyway, I remember someone asking me, a fellow teenager at the time, "Hey, Brent, you want to start a UFO club?" And I says, nobody really knows for sure. It's just a waste of time. And then I read Frank Edwards' book, and I've been wasting my time for 52 years now.
Yeah, because it's quite strange because we're a similar age and therefore we probably had very similar influences because I very much remember the Frank Edwards book. And you got hold of these books and you read them. But I mean, for instance, it's funny how certain cases stick in your mind.
Hmm.
I remember particularly the Wannock Reservoir case,
Yes.
UFO and the Wannock Reservoir in upstate New York. That really intrigued me. And is it the Flatwoods monster?
Yes.
Both of those.
Yes.
And that one scared the hell out of me. And funnily enough, it's only in my research recently, literally last week, I came across a link with that to another case. And I thought, because that was a really odd, that's the thing about UFOs, as John Keel would say, it's almost like a cosmic joker. It's very Jungian. They're almost archetypes and they're weird. It's as if somebody's saying, what kind of really weird creature can I actually create now for people, for human beings to report back because they're going to think they're crazy.
Hmm.
But people are having genuine experiences. It's self-evident. I mean, for instance, you've interviewed many UFO experiencers and abductees and everything. What's your general opinion when you interview them? Do you think that they are just hallucinating, or do you think that it's a really genuine experience for them? And if you do, what do you think is really going on here? What does Brent Raynes really think is happening, and what is going on? What is the game? What's the big game?
Anthony, I'm still kind of struggling with that, but I think that some people come away from the experience feeling it's very negative, like Keel did, and I even asked Keel in a conversation we were having on the phone one time. We were talking about Marian apparitions and the similarity to like Fatima, Portugal, and what was seen there in 1917 and earlier, and all of these various Marian apparitions, the religious elements. And I said, you're always talking about demonic type characteristics, the trickster. And there are people who report, and what about the angelic type things, the positive type things? And his response was, they turn sour in the end. And he said that back in the late 60s, he had issued a form letter informing his colleagues in the field that he felt that this phenomena did not have the best interest of humanity in consideration. I like to try to take a more, positive, upbeat consideration to it. I do realize that it's hard to get a theory going of everything because, as we were just recently doing a panel interview for the magazine with various academic people and talking with my longtime co-editor and friend and colleague, Dr. Greg Little, who's a psychologist in Memphis, Tennessee. And, Greg said one of the problems is in this field you have the reason you have such chaos is you can take so many different perspectives and you can justify it in different ways, but nobody to get the theory of everything, the proverbial toe to bring it all together. It's so difficult because you got one group of people who are talking about the Space Brothers and another group who are studying injury cases and UFO hostility, and and it's hard to bring that all together. And yet there does seem to be some real credible evidence that both situations exist simultaneously. And I remember being on a show with Brad Steiger where the main host, I forget his name now, but I was describing these situations in Brazil with people being attacked by UFOs, and then over in Peru where people were saying that they were more like Space Brothers from the 1950s type situation. And he says it sounds kind of like they've all cut up different parts of the planet, these different aliens, and it's like a turf wars, this alien gang over here is doing one thing and another one over, and, but I know Greg had come up with the idea that you're dealing with an energy form that's, and this quest goes back to Keel. He was also quite influenced by Keel, his early works and everything. And he got to talk with Keel on the phone too. And so you're dealing with an interactive intelligence, and it connects with you, it interacts with you, and yet it reads you. And I thought that was a very interesting idea.
Mm.
It reads you, it knows your thoughts. And of course, Keel always talked about the reflective factor. He could even come up with an idea to test this, and pretty soon he'd begin to receive reports that kind of validated this particular theory that he was playing with. Like one was that they were aquatic. And then a few days later, he gets this report from a young man who says he was, pulled over the car to pick up a guy who was hitchhiking. And he was a real strange guy with gills on the side of his neck, and so, maybe it's a phenomena that interacts, and for some purpose, it reads us at the level that we're at, and it gives us some kind of insight to do whatever is we perhaps need to do to evolve. But if we're not at the right level, I know Greg talked about with the Native American perspective, the trickster. Native Americans said in the beginning, the trickster, on your quest, the trickster will appear. And that, at first he'll see if you're worthy of this new knowledge. So he'll test you. And if you don't get beyond that, perhaps, the first level of it properly, then it doesn't introduce you to anything more that's meaningful and worthy. If it finds that you're all ego, and like you're told that you're a it builds up your ego in some way, that you're the one, the destined one, and it gives you a perspective to contemplate, and you really don't play the game right, as someone once said recently too, then you don't evolve the way that this is where you sort of end up at. And I don't know, it's kind of hard to express that idea, but I hope you kind of follow along with it.
Yeah, no, I like the idea of that. The idea that it is somehow, it's somehow a psychological phenomenon, but it's far more complex than that. Just to say, for instance, that these things are hallucinations, I would argue, well, then we have to then understand exactly what we mean by the mechanism of hallucinations. How are hallucinations engendered by the brain? Are they engendered by the brain, or is it the doors of perception are open wider, so people actually perceiving a wider reality? Now, when you were talking there, I was reminded, in my book, I'll be dealing a great deal with DMT entities as well. And one of the things you were saying is the way in which the entities seem to be testing you, which is so interestingly shamanic, in the way in which there seems to be the kind of the shamanic trickster, and the way in which there's a linkage between the shamanic journey, the way in which in the shamanic journey you get eviscerated and you get pulled together again, which again seems to be very similar to what takes place in DMT incidences, Rick Strassman analysis, and also just the general shamanic experiences. And I was reminded when you were saying that, because there was a guy called Michael Harmer, who was one of the initial ayahuasca researchers. And when he had his extraordinary experiences, the entities turned round to him, and they turned around and said, "We are masters of the universe. You are nothing. We are the most powerful beings in the universe. We created everything." And then when he came out of his ayahuasca, he then mentioned this to a blind shaman. And the blind shaman said, "Oh, well, they always say that. they always say that. They always exaggerate." And it seems that there definitely is similarities here. And there's definitely something going on. Now, I was very interested in you touching in on the Marian apparitions. Could you talk a little bit more about your angle on this, as to where you think they are coming from and how they can link in some way to the UFO phenomenon? Because there'll be many people out there who will not know about Fatima and Lourdes and Megraujuja and the place in Egypt as well. But these are intriguing things. So if you just want to tell us a little bit about these, I would be really pleased if you could.
Sure. Because you know that Keel and his Operation Trojan Horse, back in 1970, he touched upon a lot of that in his book then. And Valley has also written about the comparisons. And there's also a book, there's actually several books. One that I read was Celestial Secrets, written by two researchers over in Portugal who actually went and interviewed some of the people who were still around back in, I think, about the mid-'70s when they started their research. And there were just a lot of similarities, you know, the angel hair type thing, the zigzagging dance of the sun that was, and the way everybody was drenched, and then the clouds opened up. You know, there was a lot of rain. They were drenched, and there was the ground was wet, and all of a sudden, they called it the dance of the sun. It just appeared, this disc, but it was flying around and doing zigzag or dancing, a falling leaf motion. That was it, which Valley thought, you know, was very comparative. And then these descriptions of things kind of like what's been called angel's hair. And actually there's a picture, I think, from around Fatima of an angel hair that was found. I don't know the details if there was an orb seen at the time, but it was actually photographed, I think, around 1957, at, you know, years later. Through the years, there have been a lot of similar manifestations in that area, and of course around the world. But these young children back actually years earlier, in 1915, began to see, you know, telling the adults, you know, we just talked to this being, and they, sometimes it was associated with like an orb of light, and they would appear sometimes over like a tree in a certain area, and I would give them a message, and it was often, the messages were often something that was related, spiritual, to that connected with their beliefs in the Virgin Mary and you know, the Catholic beliefs. And so, and you know, initially the children were threatened, you know, don't talk about this, by some of the church authorities. You know, this, they thought they were making it up, but they were told that something very significant was going to happen. It was, in a lot of times it was happening on the same day of the month, the 13th. And they were told that on October the 13th, there would be the Mother Mary had told these children that there was going to be a tremendous blessing, and that all people could see this. It would be something that would end the skepticism. And so it had built up in the media. More and more people were showing up on the 13th. And then the big event, October 13th, 1917 came along. And I think there were like estimated at 70,000 people all converged on this little town in Portugal. And so they're all gathered there. There's clergymen, there's of course many peasants and people with crutches wanting to be healed, and other afflictions. And so anyway, there was this event. Many people. I don't know that all people saw the dance of the sun, but there were many that did. Some up close there at the site. Some people from a distance away, miles away, observed this. And you know, and there was people. There was a torrential downpour just before this. Suddenly the clouds opened up. There was this thing that they thought at first was the sun, but then it was like doing these wild, it was spinning like disc, and it was releasing different colors. People in the crowd would see reds and blues and so on, different colors of the spectrum. And suddenly everything was dry. The clothes were dry, the ground was dry, and they were very mystified by the whole phenomenon, you know. And so anyway, there have been lots of similar events down through the years. Marian apparitions. There was one outside of Cairo, Egypt, a little town called Zayatin back in 1968 to 1970. Not only were there thousands and thousands of witnesses, but there were photographs of like this glowing, luminescent, it was taken to be the Virgin Mary. It was believed by many of the people there, and also luminous birds flying around, orbs and things. And my friend Greg Little and his wife were in Cairo, Egypt a few years back, and they actually went there and talked to some of the witnesses. Greg's been extremely impressed with that series of events.
That's intriguing.
So,
I've seen the photographs of those, and they look a bit strange. But then again, there is an argument to say that, you know, they're blurred because they would have been they're taking something very unusual. So it doesn't necessarily, because they look slightly odd, that they mean that they're not genuine. So what do you
Mhm.
think was taking place there with the Dance of the Sun? My mother used to go on about this. My mother was Roman Catholic, and I have no religion at all. But she used to always say about this event and say, this was proven. I'd say it's utterly ridiculous. How could the sun come that close to the earth and not fry everything? But even at my young age, I suddenly sort of thought to myself, with my knowledge of UFOs, and thought, well, if it was a UFO and if people were misinterpreting the figure of the Virgin Mary, the BVM, and assuming because for cultural reasons you associate it with a particular cultural belief system, it suddenly then made sense. And I do recall reading about this event where all the water was dried, as if there was some kind of heat going on. Now,
Mhm.
so many witnesses to that. I mean, the only way you can fall back on that is to say it's some kind of collective hallucination. But collective hallucinations, that proves that there was something external to people's perceptions for all different peoples to see it in some way. So again, it was intriguing. And I'm reminded then, moving on from that, the other area you mentioned to me when we were in contact recently about John Keel's EVPs, and I thought, wow, I don't know about this. So electric voice phenomena, and John was involved with this as well. I'm really keen to know more about this.
Well, he was aware of it, and he often felt, again, it was the ploy of he called them the ultra-terrestrials, which was a term he got from Ivan Sanderson, who thought there were maybe bases under the ocean and such. He wrote a book on it, Visible Residence. And but to Keel, they were sort of like the elementals, the uh, of the occult lore, that they were tulpers, thought forms, that they were this energy, intelligent energy that could actually create these things. And he called them hallucinations, but he called them induced hallucinations. And although they could be transmogrifications, I think another occult term that meant that they could be temporary forms, like a tulpa or something that, words mean different things to different people. But his idea was that they could create temporary, by manipulation of energy and matter, could create temporary apparitions or temporary forms that could be quite intelligent. And I was quite interested to learn that, on December 15th, 1967, when he was sitting in his New York apartment, which is in the Mothman Prophecies, and the thing came over TV about the collapse of the Silver Bridge that, killed 46 people in Point Pleasant, West Virginia. And he had been expecting something was going to happen that night. And he had these warnings about some disaster that was going to happen on the Ohio River. And then it all kind of clicked. And but something he didn't include in the Mothman Prophecies, I found as I was, working on my book, was that he had an experience that he told some people that he shared this with, and they wanted his comment on it, and said this is quite phenomenal. And he said, well, it hurts his brain too much to really think too much about it. And if something hurts Keel's brain, it's like, wow. But what happened is from early afternoon till nearly midnight, he had a visit from a friend of his, and it's mentioned in the book, Joe Woodvine, who was working for Transit Authority. And he had known this guy since 1950. He was his best man at his wedding back then. And he hadn't seen him in years, and he just happened to come by and visit him on that very day. And he said that, it looked like Joe. He had Joe's memories. Joe was flesh and blood to him. And they went out to a Jim Moseley talk that was in Manhattan. I've tried to see if anybody had pictures. The old timers still around, but nobody seems to know of any pictures. But there had to be pictures. Anyway, he says it was strange too that this happened, this visit, on the same day that he called one of the most important days of his life, when he kind of put together this idea that this intelligence knew what was going to happen and didn't do anything about it. Just kept alluding to it, and he really felt it was, a dangerous and deceptive intelligence, interactive intelligence. And but I know a lot of other people would have taken a different stance. Now he later met this guy's wife at Macy's store, and he mentioned, "Oh, I saw your husband." She said, "When?" And he said, "It was in December '67." And she said, John, that's impossible. Said he passed away of a heart attack in July 1965. And so anyway, I know that Keel's take on it was, you know, it wasn't real, but he doesn't know how it could have seemed so real. Now, a lot of people would have taken that as being a very, very positive thing. But for Keel, you know, with his idea that it was a deceptive intelligence, dark intelligence, you know, and he was an atheist, but he believed, you know, that it wasn't really an intelligence that just, you know, wore masks. It hid behind different belief systems, and for him, this was just a deceptive ploy, and he was very puzzled by it, and you know, decided not to put it in his book. But I know that he wrote about, you know, the beings could talk through tape recorders, you know, EVPs. They could appear, they could call people up on the phone. He had described having that experience. He described, you know, how people believed that they were really that person, but at the same time, he said that he thought that they were just being deluded, that it was a deceptive intelligence, the ultra-terrestrials. So after Keel passed away, July 3rd of you know, 2009, I thought, what a shame, you know, that he passed away. And there were a couple of abductees who became engaged in a few months later, who were doing paranormal work, visiting haunted sites and so on. And one of them, Brent Oldham, he had been having experiences with ghosts and ETs since age 5. And he was telling me about, you know, the ghost box, you know, you have this digital recorder. It's kind of based on the Frank's box, but today people will take say a Radio Shack digital recorder and put it on, manipulate it where it's on continuous scan, and in the white noise sections they can pick up, you know, voices. And in fact, the very first time he did it, my daughter and wife was there at the home of Sandy Nichols near Nashville, Tennessee, and anyway, I just went ahead and didn't even go participate in the session. And then my wife was saying she heard her name called, and her brother's name was mentioned. So I thought, oh, well, you know, but I was taking care of our new grandchild at the time in another room. So I just sat out on this because I'd tried EVPs in the past and never had any success. Well, in the months that followed, we periodically, Brent was getting John Keel on his ghost box. So we were together at Sandy Nichols' home on July 3rd of 2010. And I mentioned that it was a 1-year anniversary of Keel's passing. So did they mind if we tried to contact him? So we did engage in that process, and pretty soon, I believe we had 3 recorders recording this, and Brett asked, you know, could John Keel speak to us? And in a few seconds, we heard and recorded the words John Keel, a male voice. And then another time, Brett asked him, because Brett had an experience with Bigfoot one time in Ohio. So he knew that Keel was interested in cryptozoology. So he said, John Keel, can you tell us what you now know about Bigfoot? And a strong male voice came through the speakers. We had it hooked up to stereo speakers, this one ghost box, one radio. And a male voice came through saying, "Smuck Bigfoot, see?" And then there were 2 other voices in the background that said "see," and another one said "see." And, you know, we knew we were having something intelligent, interactive going on. And I was highly impressed at that point. And so my skepticism was kind of evaporating. And I asked, yeah, John, what can you tell us about Jadu? Because I didn't think that Sandy or Brett really knew anything about, you know, that far back in his background. And I thought it'd be an interesting test. And this voice came through and said, Jadu, eh? And I remember Brett saying, did he just say it? And Sandy said, yes. So I said, okay, yeah, yes. What can you tell us about Jaddu? And this sounded like the same voice said, into the fire, into the fire. Because Jaddu, from his travels over in the Orient, meant black magic. And so anyway, his voice kind of faded, but it was still there. You couldn't make out what he was saying. And then the last thing was, teach me outside. And so from that night on, July 3rd of 2010, I knew that something strange was going on. I've gotten Keel messages a number of times since, maybe half a dozen. In one that I recorded at my own home with my wife present, I got the voice said, John Keel Brent. And then another voice said, Bert here. And Bert was Berthold Schwartz, a psychiatrist that I kept hearing also. But it's not always the dead. One time there was a friend that wanted to be with me when I was going to visit someone. And anyway, it didn't work out where he could. But while I was demonstrating to my friend about how the ghost box worked, his voice comes over through the radio onto the recording, saying, hey, Brent. And it's clearly his voice, the voice of my friend, who's quite alive and well. So, and I played it for him. I played it for other people who knew, Sandy, and they all agreed, yeah, it's his voice. What's it doing there,
Well, that's intriguing in itself, isn't it? As to why, it's as if it kind of tune into a kind of an informational field or thoughts or something, because I know that some people argue it's paralalia, isn't it? Is it paralalia where you will hear what you want to hear? But funnily enough, there's something, my producer Dia would like to ask you a question as well, because there's obviously something you said that's intrigued her. Dia, would you like to pop in and ask a question?
I just want to ask a quick question because, you're giving timelines of all these mass sightings that I've read about. Very fascinating. Why that period of time and why only a certain group of people? I mean, why not show yourself and the phenomenon to all of humanity so we can just knock it out of the box, unless this place called Earth is actually their experiment, if you get what I'm saying?
One of the things seems to be that not everybody's quite ready, and not everybody has the same mental capacity or cognitive capacity to process or receive the experience. I mean, a lot of the experiences seem to have a certain psychic awareness. Sometimes they're not even aware that they have. And, Keel made a point about this RAF Air Marshal Sir Victor Goddard, who was involved in UFO studies back in the 1950s in England. And he noted that it seemed to him that a lot of the people who were seeing UFOs were psychic, and people who were non-psychic, like I used to think I was, nothing happens, they can be there present. And in fact, there was an investigator, a MUFON investigator, state director here in Tennessee recently, who told me that she had realized that the phenomena was more complex years ago, and she had about a dozen witnesses, and 4 of them were startled by seeing this craft very close range, and yet the other people present couldn't see it. And Carl Jung, the late great Swiss psychologist, described in his book on flying saucers back in the 1950s that he was at a seance or some event where there was a medium who 4 people were all excited. They could see this moon-like object hovering over his abdomen. And they motioned for Jung to come over and look at this, but Jung couldn't see it. And he wondered if something like that was going on with UFO phenomena, because he said that he called it psychoid. There's something that existed between matter and psyche. And, and even at the Harvard Medical School last November 30th, there were 2 distinguished medical doctors who were telling about their study of experiences, who were seeing orbs, UAPs, unidentified aerial phenomena, hearing voices. And they called them hallucinations, but they realized that it's more complex. They're taking a real interest because these are very grounded people who have no, a lot of them are in the military. And one of them is actually was with the CIA's Weird Desk back in 1972 when he was working with Stanford Research Institute. It was Christopher Kit Green. And when they were working, I think what really haunted him over the years was working with Uri Geller, who claimed, when he was a young child, he was hit by a beam. And of course, with Andrew PH049, the American doctor who came over there to Israel and studied him and got him studied by Stanford and everything, and proposed to the CIA that they should pay attention to this man. And he was at this Lawrence Livermore Nuclear Laboratory about 30 miles from SRI, Stanford Research Institute at the time, back in late 1974. They wanted to study his psychokinetic ability and see if he could do things like misdirect a ICBM missile, the electronic some way, or redirect a laser beam image, something that could be used military-ish, by the military. And a lot of these nuclear scientists were actually describing that they were having weird experiences there in the lab or at home where they were seeing like orbs floating through the air or rolling across the ground, even seeing these large bird-like apparitions in their homes. And in one instance, a physicist and his wife saw like a gray cloth arm with a hook on the end of it that was like a hologram hovering, I think, over the edge of their bed. And they would come in the morning, and as a routine, they would, be asked if there was anything unusual that happened. And because they worked at a site that required, a great deal of security, they wanted to make sure that no one, say, from, foreign intelligence was approached them about anything. They want to make sure, but they didn't expect that they were going to be hearing all such strange stories. And apparently 2 of the men and the scientists actually quit because of all these weird things that was happening. And I actually got to talk with Uri Geller on the phone about this. And I think that, if you read PH049's book, Uri, you realize that there were a lot of strange psychoid type things that happened to them, and he told me everything in that book that that Andrea PH049 wrote was true. He said he can't explain it. He didn't know why things happen the way they do. And over the years, he's tried to reduplicate the EVP type thing that they experienced, and he couldn't do it. He doesn't know why the interactive intelligence that they had discontinued, And, but I got to talk with, I've been in touch with Gary Nolan, who is one of the scientists that spoke at the Harvard and is working with Christopher Green. And they've actually gotten together with Jacques Vallée quite a bit and discussed some of the cases that he studied. And so they're interested in doing MRI brain scans of people and getting all their medical records and doing a real serious study. But they termed them hallucinations, but they know they're actually much more. It's just a convenient, and even Keel talked about hallucinations, but he talked about induced hallucinations. Jung preferred the term visionary experiences because they're, it's non-pathological. It's not exactly hallucination, but I figure that, other people, Keel being an atheist and people working in the medical field and CIA don't want to talk about visions, so they're going to talk about hallucinations that are very curious, I don't know if that answers your question, but I mean,
No,
I
it does. It does, and I thank you. And I completely get what you're saying. But as I'm sitting here listening, I'm saying to myself, well, there are a lot of people who can't handle this 3D physical reality and are going crazy. So it's not, you know what I'm saying? So let's just get everything out in the open. If what you and Anthony Peake have been talking about for a very long time is really reality, why not just come all out in the open? Because as far as we can see in this 3D realm, there are people going crazy just with the 3D. And, so why not just bring it all out in the open?
No, I think, I think that's a very interesting point, because I'd always wondered that. Why doesn't something land on the White House lawn or something? And it seems to be, I think, as Brent said, there seems to be this kind of restriction, as if certain people are being developed in certain ways. Possibly, it's all very intriguing, and it is. The more I get into this, the more I'm mystified. The more it just
Yeah.
makes me think how just odd this all is. It's a game. It's a joke. It's something just weird. Now, I'm aware we're about to run out of time, Brent. So if you can tell people a little bit about how people can contact you, and maybe just give us a little bit of a snapshot of your new John Keel book as well. Tell us the title and when it's due to be out and everything else. That would be really great. We've got about another 2 or 3 minutes.
Okay, well, on the title, I kicked around a title. I'm not sure that we've really decided. Rosemary said the title I pitched at it recently sounded kind of catchy. Some other people liked it. I'm not sure that we'll end up with, but I was going to call it John A. Keel, Friends, Foes, and UFOs.
Wow.
But, I'm not sure that'll end up being the final title, But I'm kind of reorganizing some areas in the book right now, and I got to get it back to Rosemary, and I've kind of dragged my feet working on some other projects. But I hope to get it out, because I'm going to be speaking at 2 conferences pretty soon. I mean, yeah, one is the Alien Expo in August. That'll be in Knoxville, Tennessee. And I'll also be speaking at the Mothman Festival in Point Pleasant, West Virginia in September. So, I've got to have the book done and available at that time, so I can be signing autographs and such. But anyway, I've edited Alternate Perceptions since actually it started in 1985 as basically a 3-4 page newsletter called Para-Ufology Forum. And from the very beginning, my friend Greg Little was, working on articles and things for me. And then in 1993, we're out down in Mississippi looking at Indian mounds, and he says, "Hey, why don't we join forces? And I help you do this, because I've been involved in printing various newsletters and things, and we can give this a much more professional image than what I was doing at the time." And eventually we got up to about a 56, 58 page magazine that had a color cover, and we had magazine distributors across the US and up into Canada. But about 2000, we realized, Greg pointed out to me that, the industry is changing. Everything's going internet. And I'm afraid we're going to too, because we're losing some of our distributors. Most people are just wanting to get their information from the internet. So we're going to go ahead and pay our, maybe print one more issue, but otherwise pay our subscribers back, the money that they didn't go on their subscriptions to fulfill their descriptions, and then just direct them to the internet. And so I miss the old publication days, but I also like the way that you can reach an international audience on the internet as well. So I think everything is good, and we're continuing our mission, whatever that is.
Well, that's excellent, because I love the magazine. I think it's really excellent, and it's so much needed. We need magazines like this, whichever way they're distributed as well. So Brent Raynes, thank you very much. Wonderful, fascinating conversation, as I expected it to be. And I've learned a great deal, and there's still an awful lot I need to talk to you about, but maybe we can probably have some kind of Skype con at some stage in the future, particularly in the research of my new book. Right, okay, everybody, thank you for listening in. Our next guest for the May show will be Dr. Alex Defoe, who is an Australian parapsychological researcher who I met in Australia when I was down in Melbourne 3 or 4 years ago. Alex is doing some very, very interesting work, and very keen to have him and have his opinions on these phenomena. Okay, so Brent Raynes, thank you very much. And
thank you, Anthony.
Okay, and thank you, Dia Nunes, as always, over there. Because, folks, you got the opportunity there to actually hear Dia speak. She doesn't normally come in forward, so obviously that's a good sign that she was really keen and very, very interested. Okay, thank you very much. Until next time. Thanks. Bye-bye.
Right. Thank you, everyone.